warm welcome to everyone. So our webinar today is about rethinking urban weed management from glyphosate to sustainable solutions. And I would like to thank Jutta Paulus and Christophe Cleargeau for co-hosting the meeting with us today and being on the side of European citizens in the fight against toxic pesticides and how we can develop alternatives that are safer for our health and they don't put the environment at risk. Myself, I'm Magelikili Simahu. I'm from Pesticide Action Network Europe. For those not familiar with our organization, we're a network of NGOs fighting and working to reduce and minimize as much as possible the use of hazardous pesticides and replace them with environmental alternatives. We have an expert team. We run court cases and, of course, campaigns. Before we start, some housekeeping rules. First of all, please keep your cameras off and your microphones during the meeting. There will be a Q&A session at the end. And also to let you know that the webinar is recorded. Some changes in the programs. Unfortunately, the mayor of Turuk Palind couldn't join us. He had a last minute change this morning. So we will jump straight into the panel of discussion. But nevertheless, we have a representative from the city who will explain to us how they have become pesticide free. So our webinar today forms part of a Pesticide Action Week, which is a European initiative launched by a French member, Generation Future, to keep raising awareness about the toxicity of pesticides and how this can impact our health and bring space for discussion about alternatives that they don't put at risk neither our health nor that of our children or the environment. This webinar is also part of our campaign Pesticide Free Towns. It's a campaign where mayors or region are motivated to become pesticide free and stop using chemicals for the management of green and urban public spaces. It's an initiative to bring nature back in the cities and create an environment that is safe for everyone. We received so much positive feedback during this campaign where gardeners and caretakers of public spaces share with us their excitement when they managed to substitute toxic pesticides with safer and environmental friendly alternatives, from growing plants and flowers to using steam and foams to combat weeds in pavements. They feel content that they have stopped spraying toxic chemicals in our surroundings. The second focus of our webinar today is glyphosate. It's the active substance of what has become the most popular pesticide in the world, and Europe is no exception. It was promoted by its producers as safer than salt. However, now we have so much evidence that shows that this is far from the truth. We're going to hear today how exposure to glyphosate is linked to serious concerns for human health, but also for the environment and biodiversity. And we're also going to hear about the widespread exposure of everyone to pesticides, including glyphosate. Last year, even though Europe has a very strict regulation, and it's been more than 10 years now that pesticides that cause harm should not be authorized. However, last year, the Commission, together with the support of 17 member states, renewed the license, the approval of glyphosate for 10 years, despite the citizens' concerns, together with members of the parliament, but also with scientists. the Commission decided to move forward. However, there is an exception. There is a recommendation within the renewal that says that glyphosate should not be used in public spaces in line with the Sustainable Use of Pesticides Directive. And this is why also we are here today, because this is an opportunity for cities to become glyphosate free. And without further delay, I will give the floor now to Jutta Paulus. Jutta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Angeliki, and thank you very much, especially for organizing this webinar and hosting this webinar. It is really crucial that the word is spread that alternatives to glyphosate are out there, are possible, and even more so in urban surroundings where we really do not have the need to have everything absolutely weed-free and there are no crops to protect. I have been launching a campaign against the renewal of the active ingredient glyphosate last year. Unfortunately, although this campaign did garner a lot of support from the public, from scientists, also from some member states, we did not succeed in ending the authorization of glyphosate. And I do not want to preempt the panel discussion, of course, because we have really renowned speakers from science who can tell you much more about the health effects, about the neurotoxicity of the substance. I would rather try to focus a bit on the political issues. And let's not forget that glyphosate originally was designed as an antibiotic. And unfortunately, the effects on soil are not substantially recognized in our pesticide authorization procedure. So how does the pesticide authorization work? The active ingredients are approved at EU level, and the member states will then approve the products that contain the active ingredients. But unfortunately, the regulation this authorization is based on is quite old. So our problem is that the science behind this regulation is, of course, even older, because someone starts research, then he or she writes a paper, then we have this peer review process, then the paper gets published in a scientific journal, then someone else says, oh, that's interesting, I'll do some research too, picks it up, does a similar experiment, and in this manner, a way of assessing, for example, toxicity towards aquatic organisms or soil organisms evolves. And several years later, OECD or a similar organization comes up with a test guideline, which is then can be used throughout laboratories all over the world. So between the first idea, let's study the effect of an active ingredient on a certain organism, and the ready-to-use test guideline, we have a period of at least 10 years. So if we look at the pesticide regulation, this is based on science, which is by the time of the regulation already at least 10 years old. And the guideline, the regulation we're now using to authorize pesticides is more than 15 years old. So we're doing authorization based on 25-year-old science. No wonder we are seeing all these problems with biodiversity and health, because of a lot of the science which has happened meanwhile is not included in the regulation. So politically speaking, what we really need is to bring the regulation back to the state-of-the-art science, because that's not where it is right now. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is rather the opposite. It was really a very weird week. Was 3 weeks ago, I believe, the European Environment Agency brought forward the climate risk report, assessing that Europe is not prepared for what we will face due to climate change, due to the climate crisis. And one of their recommendations was change the agricultural system, use more sustainable agriculture so that our ecosystems are not so much stressed anymore. And on the day after, the Commission brought forward a statement saying more or less, okay, we've read this, we've understood, we'll talk to member states. But only 3 days later, virtually all green elements of the common agricultural policy were scrapped. So they're actually doing the opposite from what they're saying. And if we look at what has been prepared now for the next term, one of the top issues is labeled as boost our agricultural sector to ensure food security. Well, sorry, you can only ensure food security if you strengthen the agricultural ecosystems, if you make them more sustainable, if you don't stress them so much, if you make sure that you have the ecosystem of insects which prey on the pests, of birds which prey on pests, of a healthy soil. We have 60% degraded soils in Europe, and we're really speeding in the wrong direction. And one of the major wrongdoers, so to speak, is glyphosate, because it is used about 50,000 tons per year are used in the European Union alone. Most of it, of course, in the agricultural sector, but also in urban surroundings. And there, I think it is really the easiest way to transition away from glyphosate, because we should not we should not take it easy that this active ingredient is used close to the playgrounds of our children, and also close to the rivers and lakes which are present in our urban ecosystems. We know that glyphosate is an extremely toxic ingredient for aquatic organisms. And at the end of the day, this also affects our drinking water. That's clear, because we get clean drinking water from the ecosystem, which cleans the water that goes to the groundwater bodies. And it can only do so if we don't poison it with glyphosate. I'm pretty eager to hear how cities can transition away from using glyphosate, from using pesticides at all. And I'm sure that a lot of citizens would agree with me, with us, saying, let's use as few pesticides as possible. And on the other hand, we have the big agricultural lobby saying we can only feed the world with a lot of pesticides. Well, if we look at our food system, 1/3 of our food is wasted. It's thrown away before it even reaches the shops. Then again, the shops throw away quite a bit, and of course the households too. And if we just take this third, it's easy to lower our usage of pesticides, even though the yields will be smaller, but they will not be much smaller. And as I said, we want to have an agricultural system which works also in 20 years or in 30 years' time. And our current agricultural system will definitely not do so. All scientists tell us that, and it's time to listen to the science, not only when it comes to the climate crisis, but also when it comes to the biodiversity crisis, which is the bigger threat for human survival, if you believe science. And I'm committed to continue fighting for a politics that actually tackles these crises. Thank you very much, Pam, for helping us, helping me and other politicians that have made this commitment on our way and supporting us.
Thank you, Jutta. It's really important to your fight next to the citizens is really important, and thank you for highlighting why we need to move away from toxic pesticides, including glyphosate. And now, unfortunately, Christophe Cleargeau couldn't join us in person because he had another meeting on agricultural issues again, but he has sent a video. So my colleagues are going to share with us the video. Yes, thank you. All right.
I'm very pleased to participate to this webinar today organized by PAN, because the battle on glyphosate is not finished. It is an open battle, and we need all to mobilize, to push our idea, and to make the Commission re-examine its decision. This is the sense of my support to all the initiatives from NGOs, and to my support to this initiative today. It was a pity not to have in the work from the Commission any real attention to day-to-day life with pesticides and glyphosate in our cities and regions. The most simple, the most elementary thing would have been to protect young people, to protect public spaces. And that's what you will discuss this morning. In France, it is the case. There is a national law to forbid glyphosate in public spaces near children life sites, near hospitals, near schools. And I think it must be a strong fight at European level to have this decision from the Commission, even if the glyphosate is authorized for 10 years, what we are still fighting against. So thank you for your mobilization, and you can count on me to be mobilized with you on this subject now and after the election, because we need to fight for months and for years to gain new victories. Thank you.
And I'm very pleased that we have here with us today Norbert Freeman. A couple of words. He's originally a biochemist, and he became a professor in biochemical pharmacology and toxicology at the Faculty of Medicine in University of Ghent in '93. He was at the University Hospital of Ghent in '95 as an expert in environmental issues and lectures on health and environment in the medical school. He has published more than 50 scientific papers, and here he's active at the Superior Health Council related to matters on environment and health in the section of chemical agents, and contributes to several advices. And that's why he's here with us today to say a few things about glyphosate, public health, and environmental issues. Mr. Freeman, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, could I have the first slide, please? Okay, so my name is Freeman. I was working at the University Hospital in Ghent and at the university in the medical school. At the medical school. Next slide, please. So this is the university. It's one of the biggest of Belgium. Yeah, okay, next one. So what I would like to do is give you a few ideas on the very complex relationship between glyphosate and human health. This is not a very easy presentation because toxicology is not an easy science. So excuses on beforehand, I'll make it as clear as possible. Next slide, please. I have 6 points. I will give a very brief introduction about glyphosate. It will be very brief because I assume that most of the people who are listening are aware of what glyphosate is about. I will have a very short notice on the health of lower organisms and animals. I'll stick most of the time to health for humans. What are the problems? What are the solutions? And I'll end up with some conclusions. Next slide, please. So glyphosate first used in the early 70s. It was first patented as a metal chelator. Later on, it was an antibiotic, and only in '74 they found out that it was killing herbs, mainly through the target enzyme in plants, and I spare you the real name. Believe me, it's a complicated name, APSPS enzyme, which is inhibited by glyphosate. In 1996, Monsanto succeeded in producing cultures which are resistant to glyphosate. So it was a very fortunate thing because the agriculture could use in one single spray, they killed the herbs and preserved the very the cultures for consuming. The first use in the European Union was in 2002. Then there was a landmark publication of IARC, International Agency Research on Cancer. It's a member of the WHO. It classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic, class 2A, which is quite high in the carcinogenic hierarchy. EFSA permitted the glyphosate use for 10 years last December. And just to make sure that we understand, glyphosate is virtually non-acute toxicity, has no acute toxicity, virtually not. If there's a toxicity with Roundup, it's probably due to the adjuvant. And once more, it's probably the most efficient pesticide ever compared to all others, which is explaining its use at the moment. Next slide, please. In lower organisms, I'll go very quickly to it. I'm not an expert on this matter, so I'd gladly refer to the paper of Jutta et al. In 2018, which shows very clearly that lower monocellular structures, microbes and things, are sensitive to glyphosate. Rats and mice are sensitive to glyphosate, and those experiments are mostly due to the approval of the use of glyphosate. So it's a legal obligation to do these experiments. And from these results, there is clear evidence that there is toxicity, there is dose dependency, and its various forms of toxicity are shown in rats and mice. There's a lot of attention to honeybee being sensitive to glyphosate because they're pollinators. If these are killed, we're in serious troubles. What we know now is that social behavior of honeybees is disturbed. There's disorientation between the feeding grounds and the hive. And these effects are due at the microbiome of the honeybees. So it's important to realize that honeybees are sensitive to glyphosate, not so sensitive, not so important compared to neonicotinoids, which are killing the bees. If Roundup kills bees, it's probably due to the toluamine, which is the adjuvant to glyphosate in Roundup. Next slide, please. Yes, health in humans. No, the first point I want to make is about carcinogenicity. Now, in 2015, as I said, IARC published this paper on the carcinogenicity of glyphosate. Glyphosate is clearly carcinogenic using in vitro experiments. In cell lines, we can clearly demonstrate that it is carcinogenic. The mechanism is known, the extent is known, the dose dependency is known. So there's no doubt about that. However, if you go from the lab to the human situation, then you're using epidemiology as the science to support any statement. So this is one of the problems, and I'll come to that within a couple of minutes. Of note is that IARC said it's probably carcinogenic to humans, while EPA, EFSA, ECHA declare that glyphosate is not carcinogenic. So we have some problem in the interpretation of what these organizations are saying. The solution is that, as what I like to show in the next slide, please. It's a figure, and the one back, please. Previous, yes, okay, stick to that. So the horizontal axis, and I spare you the statistics, the horizontal axis is a measure for the degree of carcinogenicity of a particular molecule or situation. For instance, at the right side, you see asbestos. If you've been working in an asbestos mine, you have about, well, somewhere between 20 and 30-fold chance of developing a disease related to asbestos. Most of the time, it's a mesothelioma. If you smoke as a female, you have about 20-fold more risk of developing lung cancer. For male, it's somewhere between 10 and 15. So if you go to that right to the left side of this figure, then you see a number of compounds: arsenics, diesel exhaust, processed meat, and there is glyphosate. Glyphosate gives, it's what the figure is saying, that the carcinogenicity risk of glyphosate is about the same level as diesel exhaust or processed meat. Meaning, next slide, please. Next slide. Yes. So the carcinogenicity of glyphosate is comparable to the carcinogenicity of diesel exhaust and processed meat, but it is lower than the carcinogenicity of smoking or asbestos. Now, as a mental experiment, most of the people, if you say some molecule is carcinogenic, it is compared to what is a known carcinogenic, for instance, smoking. So it is not comparable to that level. However, the point is that if you smoke, you choose to smoke. If you eat processed meat every day, it is your own choice. While we're all, whether we like it or not, we're all continuously exposed to glyphosate. Glyphosate is present at any level of the environment. When you eat, when you drink, whatever you do, you're exposed to glyphosate. Probably at low concentrations, but we know that these low concentrations in the end could express carcinogenic properties, certainly in experimental circumstances. So, coming back to EARC and EFSA, for instance, both instances are correct. EARC is correct. It is a carcinogenic. EFSA is correct, is saying that the carcinogenicity of glyphosate is lower compared to known carcinogens. So far for carcinogenicity. Next slide, please. It is clear that glyphosate has endocrine disrupting properties, both in animals and in human cell lines. We know the molecular mechanisms, and I've added some references. We know exactly how it works, and we know it is an endocrine disrupting molecule. Related to humans, we have some rather limited information. We know it's altered female fertility, altered immune reaction. We have some data supporting these statements. I want to refer to the EFSA Journal 1917, saying that EFSA found no evidence of endocrine disrupting properties of glyphosate, which is contradictory to more recent research. And I refer to what Madam Jutta Paulus said a couple of minutes ago. We're talking in the EFSA journal about science, which is quite old. This is recent science. And I come to that point within a minute. Next slide, please. One of the most recent findings, and probably one of the most important findings, is that glyphosate acts at the enteric microbiome, being the totality of the microbes present in our enteric system. It is likely that the glyphosate the target of glyphosate in plants, the EPSPS enzyme, is not unique to plants, but is present in lower microorganisms, such as the microorganisms in the microbiome of animals and of humans. It is clearly been shown. So, next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, it is acting on the microbiome of humans, leading to what is called dysbiosis. Now, I don't want to go into details, but the microbiome, the totality of the microbes in our enteric system, is a very delicate, balanced system of different microbes. So in this system is disturbed, we're calling this dysbiosis. And the dysbiosis could lead indirectly to the release of toxic molecules from the enteric system into the abdomen, from where it is taken up and leaded to other places in our body. So we know that glyphosate acts on the microbiome, and we know that this activity is causing the release of endotoxic molecules, which are affecting human health. Next one, please. Finally, the fourth and most recent development is the link to neuronal pathologies. We know since very short time, 24, that glyphosate crosses the blood-brain barrier. The presence of glyphosate in the brain has been demonstrated. And I've added two references of 22. Glyphosate and glyphosate preparations have significant adverse effects on the brain and behavior. And Costas Ferreira says it's unequivocal that exposure to glyphosate produces important alterations in the structure and the function of the nervous system of humans. It is clear that there is an effect. Admittedly, science has not defined the exact molecular mechanisms, which is unfortunate, which is a work in progress. And it doesn't mean that there is no effect. We clearly can demonstrate the effect. Next slide, please. Okay, what are the problems? The problems is that as far as carcinogenicity is concerned, the risk of developing a cancer due to exposure to glyphosate is probably low and is likely to occur for the most exposed person. And this has been demonstrated. Now, if you study, whatever you study on the disease and exposure relationship, you're using epidemiology. Now, epidemiology is a very difficult science. It is intrinsically difficult of yielding definite proof, even in cases where we're sure there's a link. The link between asbestos and mesothelioma is very clear, has been shown in 1904. It took about 100 years to forbid the use of asbestos. For smoking, we know it's causing cancer since 1955, but you still can buy cigarettes. So the problem is that the epidemiology is showing a risk for developing a pathology. It is not sure that you will develop the pathology. And this is an argument which is always used by the promoters of the use of glyphosate. Epidemiology never gives proofs of the individual case. Now, the last problem is that we're exposed. Whoever, wherever, whatever you do, we are all exposed. And in this sense, glyphosate is part of what is called the exposome, the totality, not only of chemicals, the totality of the environmental burden on our body. So we have a lot of problems related to the glyphosate point. Next slide, please. What solutions? Well, it's very clear that a short-term complete ban of glyphosate is unrealistic. There is no chemical alternative. The economic consequences would be devastating if we stop it now. Well, on the other hand, we need to feed the world. And I don't want to go into the political discussion, which Jutta Paulus started a couple of minutes ago. I just think that for this moment, the the ban of glyphosate, the complete ban tomorrow, would not work and will not, is very unrealistic. We need to study further the effects of glyphosate on human health, which is very clear. One point which is bothering me a lot is the willingness of relevant authorities to review decisions if new information is available. There's no criteria. What we're missing is the criteria. When is new information relevant to review the decisions? And I've shown you some references of 21, 22 on the microbiome, on the neurological problems. Apparently, they have not been used by EFSA in deciding December 23. Problem is, when will they be used? Now, and the long-term solution will be a mentality change. And as mentioned, a quarter, well, 3/4 of the crops are used to feed animals for consumption. Most is thrown away, as Jutta said. So the dietary change to a vegetarian diet, as promoted by the Lancet journal, is one of the probable solutions, not completely, but it could be part of the solution. Next slide, please. Yes, short-term actions is the limiting the use, and we know no use for glyphosate by non-professionals, which is the case, which is already at stake. Reduce the exposure by bystanders. It's not because they're not non-professionals cannot use it that we are not exposed. There's integrated weed management and promotion of biological pesticides, because at this moment it's likely that we will need some pesticides whatsoever before we can change to a non-pesticide kind of agriculture. Some of the measures already taken in France, for instance, Parkinson's disease among farmers is considered as a professional disease, which is important. It's recognition that Parkinson could be due to glyphosate exposure. In Belgium, for instance, glyphosate is banned for private consumers. We cannot use it in parks, where children are, and so on. So there's some limitations to the use. In Germany, there was a ban. It was lifted until June this year. Austria and Luxembourg, they failed. There's a failure to ban glyphosate, although they wanted to do it. So there is a lot going on, not sufficiently as far as I'm concerned. Next slide, please. What can I see? Well, whatever solutions are presented, they are counteracted by the industry. And I'm pretty sure that there is a lot of pressure from the industry on political decision-taking bodies. Before December 23, there was a lobbying by the glyphosate renewal group, and they're spending a lot of money on during the lobbying activities. They're lobbying against farm to fork. They're lobbying against the 50% reduction of pesticide movement and so on. There's a lot of lobbying. Now, the most recent activity, it's in the US, led by Bayer, is the Modern AG Alliance. And their slogan is control weeds, not farming. And they're promoting the use of glyphosate, saying that farmers couldn't do without, just to make sure that whatever solutions or whatever activity is planned, it will be contradicted to the industry. Next slide, please. Conclusions. I've tried to make clear that glyphosate is not an innocent molecule, far from innocent. It causes several pathologies, directly, indirectly. We know these are facts. This is not unrealistic. These are facts. The ubiquitous use of glyphosate causes omnipresence in all parts of the environment. It affects everybody. When you eat your salad at noon, be sure that you're consuming glyphosate. If you go to a restaurant, independent of the stars of the restaurant, you're eating glyphosate. It is important in particular for the young and unborn, because this might affect development at older age. So, taken together, all this is the realistic example to apply the precautionary principle. And I'm have sufficient reasons to consider a gradual, well-planned ban of glyphosate in the very near future. Last slide, please. So, conclusions. It is not only the carcinogenicity of glyphosate that is important, it's the toxicological profile, the total toxicological profile, requiring timely banning of the pesticides. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Freiman, for your presentation. And thank you also for highlighting that it's not about cancer that we are concerned when it comes to glyphosate, but the fact that it's an antibiotic agent and can act on our microbiome, which is linked to not only to our immune system, but also to a nervous system, and maybe could explain some of the indications that we see in linking glyphosate exposure to Parkinson or other neurological diseases. Here, I really welcome that you mentioned the precautionary principle, because in Europe, the law is underpinned by the precautionary principle. It means we don't need to prove all the mechanisms of how harm takes place. But if we have evidence that there is harm, and when it comes to glyphosate, we do, then our regulators can take political action. But as we've seen, that was the case when it came to glyphosate renewal for 10 years. It was more a political decision rather than scientific. I also agree that our intensive agricultural system cannot change in one day, but so we really need to act now. We cannot wait. We really need to take action, and that's why here we come to discuss, like, the very first step is to make our cities glyphosate free. We'll come back with Q&As later. So I would like next to give the floor to Alisa. Mr. Hofer, can you wait so we can continue with the scientific discussion? Okay, so our next speaker is Lisa Hafsky. She's from BEL. Lisa, I will let you pronounce your organization. Alice is a campaigner. She has been from Germany. She has been working, BEL is they work together with the organic sector and civil society organizations for sustainable agriculture without synthetic pesticides. Alisa has a background in communication and environmental politics, and she has been working the last 2 years in the campaign to phase out synthetic pesticides. And today she's going to present to us work that they've done on pesticide residues in different parts of Germany. Alisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'll just quickly share my presentation. Can you see that all right? Perfect. So yeah, I'm Alisa. I'm a campaigner at the Bündnis für eine enkeltaugliche Landwirtschaft is our long German name, but short BEL. And we're an association of organic businesses and civil organizations within the organic sector. And today I'm going to talk to you about our study on atmospheric transport of pesticides, which we initiated in 2019 together with the Environmental Institute Munich. And the study was carried out by the Team Institute for Integrated Environmental Monitoring and is the most comprehensive study done on this subject in Germany so far. Now, before I get into the details of the study, I'll just quickly explain how we came to initiate this study in the first place, because in 2015, we analysed the urine of over 2,000 German citizens for glyphosate residues, and we actually found glyphosate in over 99% of the samples, so nearly every participant had glyphosate in their urine. And so we started to ask ourselves, how does glyphosate actually get into our body? Because we could rule out that it was through tap water because the residues that we found actually exceeded the maximum residue limit for drinking water. And we could also rule out that it was via food because half of the participants stated that they only ate organic foods, and there was very little difference in the results between the organic and the non-organic eaters. And so this led us to the suspicion that glyphosate and other pesticides might be in our air and get into our body via inhalation. And the suspicion that glyphosate is in our air was then confirmed in 2018 when we did a tree bark monitoring of 47 trees in Germany, and we found residues of over 100 different pesticides. And then this finally led us to our extensive study on atmospheric transport, which we published in 2021. Now, if we look at our study, we analysed a total of 163 sampling sites across Germany, and the sites included non-protected areas such as agricultural fields and private gardens, protected areas such as national parks and nature reserves, as well as some cities. And we used 4 different sampling methods for the study. So the Team Institute that carried out the study developed special passive air samplers for our study using 2 different filters, one to detect glyphosate as a non-volatile substance and one to detect volatile and semi-volatile pesticides. So we had 49 of these passive samplers, and we also included 20 filter mats from ventilation systems from houses, 41 honeybee bread samples and 6 tree bark samples, as well as the 47 tree bark samples from the previous monitoring done in 2018. And so this gave us a total of 163 samples, which were analysed for the presence of over 500 different substances. Now, before I show you the results of the study, I'd just quickly like to explain what we mean when we talk about atmospheric transport, because this actually includes 2 different types. So one is pesticide drift, which I'm sure most of you will know, which happens shortly or during application when the wind blows pesticide droplets onto surrounding areas. So it generally tends to be shorter distances, whereas long-range transport, the other type of atmospheric transport, happens when the active substances rise into high atmospheric layers due to ground warming. So this can either happen if they're volatile and they simply evaporate, or because they stick to dust particles, as is the case for glyphosate. And because they get transported into high atmospheric layers, they can be transported via air for much longer distances. Now, if we look at the results of our study, we found a total of 138 different substances. And most of the sites, we actually found a cocktail of multiple substances. And now if we look at these findings in relation to their nearest potential source of outbringing, we found that whether the sampling site was close to a potential source of outbringing or not actually only had a very small effect on how many pesticides we detected. So, for example, even in very remote areas like the top of the mountain Brocken in a national park in Germany, we could still detect 12 different pesticides, including glyphosate. And so this just shows that pesticides can and do travel long distances via air, and as such can be found very far away from where they've originally been applied. And also the fact that they can be found in nature reserves that should be safe spaces for insects is especially worrying. And from the 138 substances that we found in our air in total, glyphosate was actually the single most substance in our study, which we found in every single passive air sampler and every single filter mat. So you can see here the red bars show the actual findings of glyphosate, whereas the blue bars around here show the findings of its main metabolite, AMPA. But as you can see, looking at both of these maps, it is very unlikely that there's actually any place in Germany without glyphosate in the air. And this is unfortunately not only the case in Germany, because in a similar study done in Austria, glyphosate could also be detected in every single passive air sampler. And the fact that glyphosate is so often found in our air is particularly interesting because up until recently, EFSA actually ruled out long-range transport of glyphosate completely due to it being a non-volatile substance. And only in the very recent risk assessment from last year, 2023, did they acknowledge that particle-bound transport of glyphosate can happen. So, as I said, it's very unlikely that there's any site in Germany without glyphosate in the air, and this unfortunately is also the case for cities. So although cities weren't the main focus of our study, we did take samples in 8 different towns and cities across Germany, and we found glyphosate in 5 of them. And what's particularly worrying about that is that in all these cities, we found residues of not only glyphosate, but a cocktail of multiple different pesticides. And the most residues we found were in a city were actually found in the heart of the city center of Berlin, so the capital city of Germany. And we found 17 different substances in the center of Berlin, including glyphosate. And this just adds a whole new level of risk because we're not just talking about the inhalation of glyphosate here, but the inhalation of a whole cocktail of different substances whose effects on human health we don't really know. And so this actually leads us to one of our last points, which is what are the implications of this? So our study shows that glyphosate and other pesticides can and do travel long distances via air and as such end up in cities as well as nature reserves. And so obviously the question naturally arises, what does that mean for our health and also for our environment? And the simple answer is that we don't really know because current risk assessments don't take the inhalation of pesticides into account and only consider the intake of pesticides via the gastrointestinal tract. But as we've seen from the previous presentation and obviously know from a large number of studies, there's definitely a huge risk for both our health and the environment associated with glyphosate in general. And so the fact that we are involuntarily breathing in glyphosate as well as other pesticides on a daily basis without really knowing what effects this has on our health is definitely worrying. And especially for cities, we also need to consider the risk of potential chemical interactions between glyphosate and other air pollutions, such as car or industrial emissions in the air, and the impacts that might have on our lungs. So here's a few things that we think needs to happen on a political level. So we think there needs to be independent research on the environmental and health implications of glyphosate in the air. And the atmospheric transport of pesticides needs to be considered in the risk assessment and approval process of pesticides. And we need yearly monitorings on atmospheric transport of pesticides all across Europe, and also frequently found substances in our air, such as glyphosate, should be banned immediately as a precautionary measure. So thank you so much for your attention. And if you have any questions, you can ask them in a minute. And also, if you can think of any afterwards, yeah, happy to email us. And we also have some brochures and info material on our website for with information on our study, which unfortunately is all in German. So I suppose that's for all the ones of you that can speak German, you can have a look at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alisa. It's very important, the study that you've done, because it gives, as you said, that it reveals a problem that is not in our radar, the atmospheric exposure to pesticides. So it's not anymore through our diet. As you said, that we are breathing pesticides and we're breathing glyphosate. It's really concerning also that glyphosate is found in all samples. It means it's volatile. And as you said, that we probably, together with a salad or a cereal bowl, we also breathing glyphosate. We're going now to the next speakers. I'm going to give the floor to Martin Bruder, that he comes from the city of Turuk Palint. Martin has a background in agribusiness and environmental policy. He was an attaché at the permanent representation of Hungary to the EU, and he was working specifically as well on chemical substances as well as other environmental issues. Then he went back to Hungary. He's been an organic farmer, and in 2019, he was elected as a municipality representative in his hometown, Turukpalint. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Well, he's focusing on a series of environmental issues, including phasing out chemical substances and pesticides. And he's here with us today to share his positive experience, because Turuk Palin is in the pathway to become a pesticide-free town. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your introduction, and I'm really grateful to be invited and be present on this important discussion. Törökbálint is not a city, actually. It's a town with 14,000 inhabitants, so a smaller town in Hungary. We are not from the capital, Budapest. Our story with the transition to being a pesticide-free town has started during the 2019 municipal election campaign. Our local association, called the Törökbálint Tomorrow, which is independent from all political parties, so it's a local association, has a very strong green identity from the very beginning of its foundation. So being environmentally friendly stated in our foundation document signed in 2018. And during the 2019 election campaign, our program consisted of a series of green measures, including the foundation of new nature protected areas and the withdrawing of chemical substances in mosquito control. Glyphosate is one important issue in town management and city management, but the other most commonly used pesticides in town management is deltamethrin, which is used for the chemical control of mosquitoes. So basically the changing the deltamethrin-based chemical control of mosquitoes has met the sympathy of the inhabitants of the town, since deltamethrin has been the most commonly used chemical substance in management or maintenance of public spaces. And the spraying of the streets and obviously the gardens, the fruit trees and vegetable gardens of the citizens, especially in the midst of the vegetation period, was an issue seriously considered. I would like to emphasize that voters are aware of the dangers of chemical substances, and putting it on a political agenda, so putting the ban of chemical substances on the political agenda is a successful strategy. I believe. So after the elections, one of our first measures was the legislative ban of the use of deltamethrin and glyphosate as well on public spaces managed by the town. This ban does not prevent private owners and farmers to use the substances, so it's it's only for the public spaces used by citizens. In the next 2 years, we have successfully managed the transition to biological mosquito control. And I have to add to that, Török Bálint did not really have a serious mosquito problem since we are not located next to any major water bodies. But using the biological solutions, we can manage the mosquito population in our town very effectively and actually on a cheaper cost. The removal of glyphosate was a more difficult issue. First of all, I shall state that glyphosate cannot be used in public parks, children's playgrounds, and on the grounds of educational institutions, according to the Hungarian authorization of the substance. Although the town maintenance unit has been using only 4 liters of glyphosate in a year, the main issue of banning the substance was the manpower need for changing the practice. We couldn't really find alternative solutions for weed control, especially on paved, blocked, and gravelled surfaces. Mechanical weed control was not effective, and it turned out to be very expensive. We have also tried the use of acetone or vinegar, but it also turned out ineffective on a longer time period. The other important issue was that we experienced a strong reluctance from the town maintenance unit and its staff, and we were in danger of withdrawing the legislation on the ban of glyphosate. And at that point, in last year, so it's 2023, we have connected the pesticide-free town network to ask for technical solutions for managing our surfaces. And during the discussions first of all, I would like to say that it was a very good experience to talk to the staff of the Pesticides-Free Town Network, and they provided us with lots of technical information, actual help how to do this transition, and they have also connected us to other towns also going on this way, so we could start discussions what are the good practical solutions on this way. And finally, we have opted for the hot foam technology. It is mainly used on organic farms, but the hot foam is very effective in town maintenance as well. The hot foam is much more effective than using only hot water, since the foam thermally shocks the plants in the root zone as well. The foam itself is a 70 Celsius grade fully environmentally friendly substance, which stays for roughly 15 seconds on the surfaces, and meanwhile kills the plants, including the roots as well. And I have prepared a short and basic presentation on the actual numbers on the cost and the application of this technology. The numbers are in Hungarian forints. So basically, this table shows the different cost of operating the hot foam technique. So there is gasoline, diesel cost. The hot foam has the highest cost from the numbers. There is water also used in the machine, and there are obviously labor costs associated. So in total, the cost of operating the machine is 15,500 forints in an hour. And the average capacity of the machine is 500 square meters. So our cost on maintaining these basically gravelled and paved blocked surfaces is roughly 31 forints per square meter. Which is actually less than half it was before. Due to the constrained capacity of the town maintenance unit, most of the management of these surfaces were contracted to entrepreneurs, and therefore we know the actual cost very sharply. So we can go to the next slide, please. These are the maintained surfaces in our town. There are 6,600 square meters of paved block surfaces. There is roughly 4,000 square meters gravelled surfaces, and there are playgrounds with 1,000 square meter surface. The maintenance with this hot foam technology has to be done in average three times a year, so during the vegetation period. So altogether, this means 34,000 or almost 35,000 square meter application, and it needs roughly 70 machine hours altogether. So I would say it's very effective man-wise as well. I would like to ask the next slide, please. So using the technology and the machine on these surfaces saves us 1.2 million forints in a year, and the actual investment cost was roughly 12 million forints. But I have to emphasize that we only using the capacity of the machine, or 1/10 of the actual capacity of the machine. So we have roughly 700 hours of extra capacity now, but we can use for our drift base. So these are the paved grounds next to the streets in the town, and we actually also have capacity to provide for third parties. So the actual return on investments depends on how how you can use the full capacity of the machine. And I brought also some pictures, so we can go to the next slide. This is basically the machine we decided to invest in. This is called FormStream L12. Next slide, please. This is how the application of the hot foam looks like in action. Next slide, please. And after 24 hours, you can see that the vegetation is already dead and dried. Next slide, please. And after 1 week, it still remains effective. Next slide, please. And after 2 weeks, it's still dry. There are only a few plants growing back with very strong, deep roots. And I believe that was the last slide. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Martin, for sharing your experience, your practical experience with us. I'm very pleased to hear that Hungary is already has banned the use of glyphosate products in public spaces such as schools, and understood you also mentioned public gardens. And very pleased to hear also the benefits and the constructive engagement that you found in the pesticide-free towns network, because that was the aim when it was built, to provide a forum where towns and cities that have that have banned glyphosate and other pesticides for a long time, they can share the positive experiences, and there, you know, we can find maybe the most efficient, and both in terms of practicalities and costs. And I'm very pleased to hear that you have reduced the costs of removing weeds. So now we can move to Mr. Hazel Hofer, who will give us an introduction, just a couple of words about Mr. Hofer. He has a legal background and a university degree from University Mannheim and Heidelberg. Apologies for my German. His, let's say, in political career started in '83 in the Ministry of Interior and Federal State of Rhineland-Palatinate. He was from '92 to 2016 in the office as full-time mayor of Verbangemeinde. And then he became a member of Landtag of Rhineland again in December 2016. Currently, he's a member of the City Council. In his role, he has been representing German associations of cities and municipalities at the European Committee of Regions of Europe in Brussels. And he's a member of Natural Resources Commissions, until today. So, Mr. Hofer, the floor is yours.
Dear members of the European Parliament, dear experts, dear participants, I'm very pleased to attend this conference as the rapporteur for the Sustainable Use of Pesticides opinion for the European Committee of the Regions, the EU Assembly of Regional and Local Representatives from all 27 member states. In our opinion, we fully support the binding targets for reducing the use and risks of pesticides in line with the objectives of the Farm to Fork strategy, and we deeply regret the reject of the proposal in the European Parliament. However, local and regional authorities' requests are more demanding than the European Commission proposal on the protection of health and biodiversity. We want more emphasis to be placed on determining the toxicity to the plant protection products used instead of focusing on the quantity. We recommend focusing on the most dangerous pesticides rather than on the quantities applied, revising the evaluation procedure and the indicators for pesticides by the European Food Safety Agency in order to take account cocktail effects and resistance. And very important, setting a buffer zone of 50 meters around sensitive areas instead of 3 meters, as initially proposed by the European Commission and to protect vulnerable people. Prohibiting the sale and use of the most dangerous pesticides by non-professionals, extend the responsibility of pesticide producers to the entire life cycle of the product, and especially for take-back and recycling. It is important to consider that bystanders are exposed to pesticides residues. Children are particularly vulnerable due to their intensive growth and development. While parents might take their children to parks and fresh air and recreation, these very spaces could unintentionally expose them to harmful chemicals. This is a crucial point to consider when discussing pesticides use in urban areas. Citizens should be protected from exposure to pesticides, and that is easily achievable based on the feedback from different cities that successfully replace pesticides with safe alternatives. Of course, users must be supported in this transition to sustainable use of pesticides or to alternative techniques. This is why we have proposed the creation of a new national fund to pest management that could be financed by risk-based taxation on pesticides, contributions of retailers, or penalty payments. To achieve the target of halving the use of pesticides by 2030, it is important to develop and promote alternatives to synthetic pesticides, such as biocontrol products, which are currently undergoing rapid development. In this regard, the simplification for the approval procedure for low-risk substances is essential. Research shows that alternative management of land without glyphosate and harmful pesticides exist. If we want to produce more for ensuring food security on the long term, biological control is the solution. Indeed, there are many examples of pests that cannot be controlled by chemical pesticides anymore, since they have become totally resistant. Then, biological control is the only effective tool remaining for intensive production systems as greenhouses. To conclude, I would like to say that local and regional authorities are very active, taking measures to address biodiversity loss and protect nature. And that includes activities to reverse the decline of pollinator populations or actions to promote sustainable farming, which works with the environment, biodiversity, and safeguards the climate. We hope that our efforts can be further recognized and that resources and tools are deployed to support our work. I wish you a very interesting conference and fruitful discussions. And my words should be in the beginning, but now maybe it's a good word in the end. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, it's really good because now we're going to open the floor for questions. I suggest that people write the questions in the chat. Yes, but thank you for highlighting also that we need to support the transition, and it's here we talk about pesticide-free towns, but the issue is sustainable agriculture and overall uh, the problem that the pesticides that we have now in the market, many of them are toxic to human health, the environment, having a serious impact on biodiversity. And we know that biodiversity right now is under threat, and we need to act as soon as possible to protect them. And we have alternatives, as we heard, but I'm going to bring the conversation back to towns and cities and glyphosate, but also other pesticides. And I will open the floor if there are any questions for our panelists. I heard, I received a message that Martin will leave us. So if you have any questions for him directly, please raise them now before he leaves. Okay, so we have one question for Dr. Freiman. You mentioned the ubiquity of glyphosate. Which routes are we exposed to glyphosate? Mr. Freeman, you're still with us? We also heard it was about the atmospheric exposure, but yes, let's have a complete picture.
Is it okay?
Yes,
Okay.
now it works.
Okay. Well, the routes of exposure are most of the exposure is by eating, by food. Glyphosate is contaminating the food, so you eating glyphosate. Now, the glyphosate enters the body, is metabolized not very extensively, and I think that the colleague from Germany mentioned AMPA as the metabolite, which is found in human urine. So the food is the most important contamination or way of contamination. There is very few uptake of glyphosate through the skin. So it's only about 2% of the dose which is absorbed through the skin. Now, I was very, very impressed by the presentation of Alisa Husky on the presence of glyphosate in the air, which is another exposure of glyphosate directly through the lung, and from lungs it's taken up in the entire body system. So we're continuously exposed to whatever you do, whatever you breathe, whatever you eat, whatever you drink, you will always end up with some glyphosate, mostly by food and drinks, less by the skin, but now also through just expiring the air. So I hope this is the question to your answer.
Yes.
Is it?
Yes, of course. Yes, thank you very much for giving us a clear picture. Is Martin still with us? Because I have a question. Okay, I see you answered. Can you take the floor? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I have started to type the answers. I need to type the name of the town. Just a second. And what are the other two questions?
The first question was the most problematic chemical that you know in the mosquito control, and
Yeah,
what is the biological solution? I think you mentioned it's a permethrin. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
No,
yeah. So it was diethymethrine I typed in the chat, and we are now using a bacterial agent, Bacillus thuringiensis, for the control of mosquitoes in the larvae form. So it's used in water bodies.
Okay, thank you. And the second one was whether the foam that you're using is oil-based, and
It's
if it
not oil
is, what
based.
okay.
It's based on a material made of corn. So actually, it's biodegradable, and it's not oil based at all. Oil.
Okay, good. And the third one, the last one in this one question was whether how long does it take for weed to regrow afterwards, after the
Uh,
foam application, more or less?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to show the pictures after the application to see the differences. So basically, the foam easily destroys all the grasses and weeds with I don't know the word, so with roots.
Yeah.
But there are weeds with very strong tap roots going down deep. Those can regrow as we experience in a few weeks.
And coming back to another question, does that mean that you need to apply the foam frequently?
We consider to use the foam 3 times in average 3 times during the vegetation period.
Okay. Yes, I think this answer, and also what tools you used. I think you saw the picture, but maybe like the tool that you used to apply the foam.
Yeah, maybe if Natalia, you can go back to the presentation and show the slide with the machine in action. So this is actually a small machine which can be drawn by a van, or it could be put on a SUV, or it's maybe the fifth slide. It has a water tank on it. So it needs water for the application, and a pipe which is up to 50 meters. So you can stop the car and walk down or walk 50 meters in each direction from the car itself with the pipe in your hand, but it's not a major consideration because these public spaces are usually quite small and separated from each other. So we are not maintaining huge surfaces, but small parks in different parts of the town. So this 50-meter wide application is more than enough for this maintenance purpose.
Okay, thank you. This is really interesting. And just to let everyone know that in the network that we have, we exchange these details, practical details as well, among cities and towns on how they have been successful. So we are very happy to put you in contact because I see you had, you were referring to manual removal and no mechanical. But yes, we can come back.
There is one more question that does honeybees like the hot
Yeah.
foam? Definitely not, but they have a chance to escape from the application. So
Yes, they
Yeah,
can
and
move
I'm really
away.
sorry, but I have to leave for another meeting. So
Yes, thank you very much,
thank you
Martin.
for the invitation.
Yes, no, and thank you for all your work.
Bye-bye.
I have a question for you, Alisa, in the chat. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yes, I have.
Yes, do you want to?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for the very in-depth question. So to the first part of the question, I can say that, yeah, we know that the half-life is under 2 days, but we can still find it everywhere in the air. And as to the second part of the question, EFSA does look at short-range transport of atmospheric transport for farmers and bystanders, but the long-term inhalation and toxicity is still not considered. So as you've written as well, they only consider short-range acute exposure and ADI. And it's important to note here as well that because this issue currently isn't really considered in the risk assessment, and because we don't really know the health implications, there is no maximum residue limit for pesticides in the air like there is for food or water. So until this is properly researched and until the cocktails effects are properly assessed, we must assume that any concentration of glyphosate in the air could be a risk. I hope this kind of answers your questions.
Yes, and I think it's important to say that it could also be that the exposure level is underestimated because of, it's adding to the overall exposure level. Thank you, Alisa, for this answer. I have a question for Freeman about the microbiome alteration and affecting human health, and how would this, what's your opinion, taking into account that in the food we have not just glyphosate, but we have also other pesticides, since it's mixtures of pesticides that they use in agriculture. We cannot hear you.
Is this always? Do you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay, right. The resistance to glyphosate, that was the question, was it? Yes.
No, it was considering the impact on our microbiome.
Yeah. Okay. So the microbiome is just a little bit of theory. It's a mixture of about 10% of the microbes are what is called good microbes. About 80% are very neutral. They're supporting, but they don't have any bad or worse activity. And about 10% are what is called opportunistic microbes, which means that they do not cause any disease or whatever, provided they are in equilibrium with the 90% of the other microbes. For instance, Clostridium is one of those 10% opportunistic microbes. So what happens if you use glyphosate on this mixture? That is that the balance is disturbed, and some of the good microbes or the neutral microbes are literally killed, which means that the balance between, which is very delicate, by the way, this balance is highly disturbed. And the glyphosate resistant microbes, they survive. Among them is the Clostridium microbe, which means that the opportunistic pathogens, which are normally under control, get out of control. and they can cause diseases. Now, one of the diseases, or one of the negative properties, which happens in that case, is what is called a leaky gut. And a leaky gut means nothing else that the enteric system becomes leaky. There are little holes which permit the diffusion from compounds which are normally restrained to the enteric system into the abdomen. For instance, lipopolysaccharides, which is a class of molecules which are highly devastating molecules, they become present, they get present into the abdomen. And in the abdomen, they're taken up into the bloodstream. Now, if they can pass the blood-brain barrier, they will get into the brain and cause a number of diseases within the brain. So it's a very complicated, well, it's not that complicated. The way I tell it now, it sounds simple, but at the molecular level, it is a very complicated system, a very delicate system. Mind that for today, there's a lot to do there's a lot of interest in the microbiome as I would say, a medical part, a biological part of our body, which is largely unknown and undescribed, which becoming very important for a number of diseases. And we're talking about neurological diseases, psychiatric diseases. So we're at the brink of a lot of scientific research which will develop in the next years and which will show that the microbiome and the use of pesticides will be linked to a number of pathologies, neurological, psychiatric diseases. So was that the question, I think, and the answer?
Yes, no, thank you very much for explaining the link between the impact on microbiome and public health and what we could expect. We have a question regarding, I don't know if our speakers here today, they can answer, but it says about plants are becoming glyphosate resistant. And many times that's why it's used glyphosate is used in mixtures with other herbicides. And the question is whether this would worsen the situation.
I can answer the question if you want.
Okay. Yes,
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
Well, we have the first mentioning of the resistance was in 1998. Now, please remember that the soybean resistant, glyphosate resistant form was made in 1966. So the first mentioning of the resistance was in 1998, 2 years later. Since then, the resistance developed gradually up until about 40 different herbs nowadays, which are more than that, which are resistant. So, which means two possibilities. Either you will use a lot more glyphosate, you will increase the dose, which is, of course, not wanted. Secondly, you will combine glyphosate with other pesticides. And you can think of whatever combination you want, 2,4-D, atrazine, and so on and so on. There are enough possibilities. But whatever you do, you combine two molecules which are at least not healthy. And from this point, the glyphosate may be the least devastating molecule. Atrazine is much more toxic than glyphosate. So if you combine it, you will worsen the situation. And this is what is feared by, well, even by the agriculture community. please remind you that at the same time, there is resistance to atrazine at this moment. Herbs get resistant. That is a property of nature to get resistant to the stressors, which that's the general property, which is happening now. Now, which means that glyphosate, it might be a possibility that glyphosate becomes the victim of its success. The resistance will be that high that it will be of no more use. And well, we need if we need chemicals, we need a completely different approach. We need other molecules. So that would be my answer, Angeliki.
Yes, and it's true that this is the experience from farmers, that they have reported that the weeds are becoming resistant to glyphosate, and it's yes, as you said, it's a victim of its success. I have another question for Alisa. Whether I know you saw one study in Austria that they also looked at pesticides in air, but are you aware of other studies, or yeah, do you have in mind yeah, the studies that, or people like a research carried out in this field?
Yeah, so last year we actually had a symposium here in Germany related to this topic, where we invited a lot of scientists that are working on atmospheric transport of pesticides. And I will share the link in the chat in a minute, probably because that's easier, or my colleague will actually. I think she's on it right now. So we had, yeah, a whole day, 2 days of that, where there were loads of presentations from different countries across Europe, where people have done studies and research on atmospheric transport.
Okay, thank you, Elisa. Sorry if I've missed any other questions, but I think I can give the floor back to Jutta, Paulus, for maybe some final remarks, and also to Martin Dermine, if yes, okay, yes, Jutta, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think we all had 2 very interesting hours with a lot of information. And for me, several things were quite new. So I wasn't aware that we had this amount of atmospheric transport, for example, for glyphosate. And of course, this again shows that we really have to adapt the scientific base of pesticide regulation, because right now the relevant parameter is vapor pressure at ambient temperature. So the assumption is if vapor pressure is low, then there is no atmospheric transport. Although, I mean, it's quite clear we are seeing atmospheric transport of Sahara dust, and sand, as we all know, has a very, very low that vapor pressure. So it's not really a surprise to see that also tiny droplets are transported through the atmosphere of these compounds. Also, I think we really should see some more research when it comes to alternatives to glyphosate, not only in urban surroundings, but also in agriculture, because it is a bit, let's say, I was a bit taken aback about the amount of work that is actually needed when using foam to get these surfaces weed-free. And the counter question, of course, would be, does it have to be weed-free in urban surroundings? Because as we all know, climate crisis is accelerating. We're seeing exceptionally high temperatures, not only over land, but also in the sea, which is ever more worrying. So we will see stronger and longer heat waves, especially in cities where we have a lot of stone surfaces which heat up in the sun and which really aggravate people's health. And during Corona, when there was no maintenance of stone pavements, weeds were growing there naturally. And some scientists said, hey, let's look whether this has an impact. And actually those tiny little weeds which are growing on those paved in those paved surroundings rather have a cooling effect. So and cooling is something which we will really need in the summers to come. So the question would actually be, dear mayors, do you really believe that people need a meticulously cleaned pavement, or shouldn't we rather adapt to the climate crisis by letting weeds, letting some wild plants grow also in our urban surroundings? I will, of course, continue to fight in the next mandate for having a revision of the pesticide regulation, and also for having a revision of the way the products are actually regulated. Because what we are seeing there, which I forgot to mention before, is that the manufacturer, they can choose in which member state they are searching for authorization of the product. So the active ingredient, it's EU level, but the actual product, it's the national level. And then the authorization is valid for the whole climatic zone. And funnily, the authorizations are mainly performed in countries which do not have a lot of scientific resources, or where the authorities are then rather overwhelmed with such a complicated procedure. For example, my home country, Germany, is actually complaining that they have to accept those authorizations which were not done in a scientifically sound manner. And that also is something which we really have to change, ever more so since the European Court of Justice has ruled that in authorizing those products, member states have to take into account any additional substance in addition to the active ingredient, which should not be regarded as inactive in the first place, which most member states are just copy pasting from the manufacturer's papers. And there is a lot of work still to be done in actually enforcing the precautionary principle, not only at EU level, but also in the member states. And when it comes to glyphosate, we have heard all about the health problems, about the huge amounts that are being used in the EU, about atmospheric transport, about the usage even in cities and close to children or other vulnerable communities. And I think glyphosate is sort of how should you call that, the poster child of what's going wrong in our agricultural system. And while it's true that a lot of other pesticides are much more problematic than glyphosate, I'm not doubting that. The crucial difference is that glyphosate is incredibly cheap. So if you go, for example, to a farmer who grows apples or pears or cherries, where it's, let's say, very, very challenging to work without any pesticides, if not impossible, because of course the consumers will not accept an apple with brown spots or similar things. They showed me their pesticides and said, "What do you think this bottle costs?" And I looked at the little label, and the label said 570 euros. I'm like, oh, wow. And he said, yeah, I'm not using more from this than I need because it costs a lot of money. But this whole canister of glyphosate is much, much less expensive, which is the reason why it is used in such a free and generous manner, so to speak. So I think our fight will continue, our fight for a toxic-free environment, our fight for citizens' health, and our fight for a regulation which is based on science and not on lobbyism. Thank you very much for all your insights. I have learned a lot today.
Thank you very much, Jutta. I couldn't agree more with you in many of the points you raised, and I'm looking forward to your work, to continue and supporting your work on this for the glyphosate-free future. And finally, I will give the floor to Martin Dermy, Pan Europe's Executive Director. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Angeliki. Thank you, and good morning, everybody. It's still the morning here in Belgium. I just wanted to first thank all the speakers for the very interesting presentations we had. So with the example of the city of Toruk-Balint, who had to make some trials and errors to be able to phase out the use of glyphosate. And I think that what Jutta Paulus just mentioned is really important, and it's really what we see when towns become pesticide free is what space do we give to nature? Because indeed, when you get rid of the use of glyphosate, you also have to accept that sometimes you may have some weeds on your pavements, which is, we can see it now for the moment, we see it in the streets of Brussels, some dandelions blooming, which is also very nice because in many areas you don't have so much space for nature. So it helps people reconsidering their relation to nature. It also helps public authorities communicating towards citizens on the dangers, invisible dangers posed by pesticides. So as we discussed, glyphosate is the most common pesticide used in urban areas in Europe. It has been classified as a probable human carcinogen by a World Health Organization agency. While we think that urban green spaces provide essential services for citizens, they also need to provide an important role in the maintenance of biodiversity. We see that our campaigns are often becoming green deserts because of the intensive model of agriculture that is mainstream in Europe, that is removing wildlife habitats, that is using important amounts of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. So it's important that we help biodiversity surviving or thriving in some green areas, including in cities. So with our Pesticide-Free Towns campaign, Pan-Europe is inviting cities to transition towards pesticide-free practices to ensure to have a healthy and biodiverse environment also in green areas. Who from us would like to see our children playing in the sand of a playground where it was sprayed with glyphosate just a few hours or days before? So while scientists tell us that the biodiversity is collapsing, and in particular the biodiversity of insects, it is really important to act wherever it's possible, and also, as Mr. Freiman said, to act in a gradual way, but also to start where it's the most easy. And we've seen with the examples of a series of countries like Belgium, like Luxembourg, like France, who decided to ban the use of pesticides in general, not only glyphosate, but pesticides in public areas. These countries are not becoming a jungle. So there is a possibility to adapt, and hundreds and hundreds of cities, towns, or villages have managed to maintain their areas without the use of glyphosate. So whatever the pesticide industry might try to frighten us and make us think that it's impossible, we have large-scale examples that demonstrate that it is possible. But of course, we also need, as citizens, to adapt and accept to see a few flowers of dandelions or other wild plants blooming here and there from time to time. And also in a series of countries, glyphosate has been also banned for private use, and citizens' gardens are also not becoming a jungle, and people are able to manage using alternatives. With this webinar, we also wish to highlight the fact that now with the EU reapproval of glyphosate at the end of last year, member states are in the process of reauthorizing glyphosate at national level. So after a pesticide substance is reapproved at EU level, within 15 months, national authorities have to reassess the national authorisations of the pesticides that contain these substances. So it is an opportunity for all countries to phase out the use of glyphosate in cities or for private uses. This is what the European Commission is encouraging member states to do, and this is what we as NGOs or as citizens need to do and to promote and to push our countries to not reauthorize glyphosate for private use and for the use in public areas. So with that, I am finishing. I wish to warmly thank member of the European Parliament, Jutta Paulus and Christophe Cleargeau for hosting this webinar. I also wanted to thank them for their work in supporting the transition towards a more healthy environment. A big thank you to Norbert Freimann, Hans-Joachim Höfer, Alisa Hafsky, Martin Bruder for sharing with us their knowledge and experience. And last but not least, I also wish to thank my colleagues whom we didn't see today, but who worked hard to prepare this webinar, Natalia Scrotani, Lisiane Copin, Angeliki Lysimakou, with the help of Emilie Bayuvian and Gergely Shimon. So thank you very much, everybody, for taking part, and have a nice afternoon.